The world once stood divided in two superpowers, two ideologies, and one new frontier no human had ever crossed before: space. In the late 1950s, humanity looked upward and realized that the future would no longer be decided only on Earth, it would be decided above it. This was not just about science, it was about power, pride, fear, and the question of which system would shape the future of mankind. Thus began the greatest technological competition in human history, the race to the moon. After World War II, the planet entered a new kind of conflict. The United States and the Soviet Union, once allies, became rivals locked in the Cold War. It was a war without direct battles, but filled with nuclear threats, espionage, propaganda, and ideological tension. Both nations understood one crucial truth: whoever mastered rocket technology would not only control space, but could also control Earth. Rockets that could reach orbit could also carry weapons across continents. Space was the new high ground. On October 4, 1957, the Soviet Union fired the first shot of the space race. Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite, rose into orbit. It was only a small metal sphere, but its radio signal echoed around the world. Every beep it transmitted was a reminder that the Soviet Union had achieved what no one else had. In the United States, shock and panic spread. Newspapers warned of a missile gap. Politicians demanded action. Parents feared for their children's future. America had been caught off guard, and the race had begun. The Soviets pushed forward rapidly. They launched animals into orbit, tested life support systems, and refined spacecraft design. Then, on April 12, 1961, a young pilot named Yuri Gagarin climbed into a cramped capsule called Vostok 1. As the engines roared beneath him, he smiled and said, "Poyechali, let's go." Moments later, he became the first human being to leave Earth and orbit the planet. For 108 minutes, he traveled above the world, weightless and alone. When he returned safely, he became an instant global hero. The Soviet Union celebrated, the world watched in wonder, and the United States realized it was falling dangerously behind. Only a month later, President J.F. Kennedy stood before the U.S. Congress and delivered a bold challenge. America, he declared, would land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth by the end of the decade. It was an astonishing promise. At that time, the United States had barely managed to send a single astronaut into space for a short suborbital flight. The moon was nearly 400,000 kilometers away, a hostile world of vacuum and dust. Many experts believed the goal was impossible, but Kennedy understood something vital. This was not only about reaching the moon, it was about proving the strength of a nation and the potential of human ambition. The challenge was set, and the race intensified. NASA expanded at incredible speed. Thousands of engineers, mathematicians, scientists, and technicians worked day and night. New launch sites were built. New rockets were designed. Astronauts endured brutal training, spinning centrifuges, isolation chambers, underwater simulations, and survival tests in deserts and oceans. Each flight was a step closer to the moon, but each carried enormous risk. Tragedy struck in January 1967. During a routine ground test, a fire broke out inside the Apollo 1 command module. In seconds, 3 astronauts, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Ed Chaffee, lost their lives. The nation mourned. Investigations followed. Critics questioned whether the moon program was worth the cost and the danger. For a moment, it seemed the dream might die. But NASA learned from the disaster, redesigned the spacecraft, improved safety, and pushed forward with renewed determination. While America advanced, the Soviet moon program began to struggle.
Their massive N-1 rocket, intended to carry cosmonauts to the moon, suffered repeated failures. Several test launches ended in explosions that shook the launch pads and destroyed vital infrastructure. Political secrecy, internal rivalries, and limited resources slowed progress. Although the Soviets continued to achieve impressive robotic missions, their dream of a manned moon landing began to slip away behind closed doors. By 1968, the United States was ready for a historic leap. Apollo 8 carried 3 astronauts around the moon for the first time. On Christmas Eve, they broadcast live images of the lunar surface to millions of viewers on Earth. They watched as Earth rose above the moon's horizon, a small, blue, fragile world floating in darkness. It was a moment that changed how humanity saw itself forever. The final step came in July 1969. Apollo 11 stood on the launch pad in Florida, the towering Saturn V rocket trembling with unimaginable power. Inside sat Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. Millions gathered near the launch site, hundreds of millions watched on television. When the engines ignited, the ground shook, and a pillar of fire lifted the spacecraft towards the sky. The journey to another world had begun. After traveling through space for 4 days, the crew reached lunar orbit. Armstrong and Aldrin entered a fragile lander called Eagle and separated from Collins, who remained in orbit above. As they descended, alarms blared inside the cockpit. Computers overloaded, fuel ran dangerously low. The landing area was rough and filled with boulders. Armstrong took manual control, searching for a safe spot. Seconds remained before fuel would end. Then a calm voice spoke over the radio. "The Eagle has landed." Cheers erupted in mission control. Humanity had arrived. Hours later, Armstrong climbed down the ladder of the moonlander. As he placed his boot on the dusty surface, he said words that would live forever. "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Buzz Aldrin soon joined him. Together, they planted a flag, collected samples, set up scientific instruments, and looked out across a silent gray landscape untouched for billions of years. Michael Collins orbited above, alone, keeping the mission alive. When Apollo 11 returned safely to Earth, celebrations spread across the globe. The United States had achieved Kennedy's goal. The race to the moon was won. But the victory belonged to more than one nation. It belonged to every scientist, engineer, dreamer, and child who looked up at the night sky and believed the impossible could become real. Further missions followed. Astronauts explored valleys and mountains on the moon, drove rovers across its surface, and brought back rocks that told the story of our solar system's birth. Then, in 1972, the last humans left the moon. No one has returned since, but the legacy remains. The race to the moon changed technology, medicine, computing, material science, and global communication. It proved that rivalry could drive progress, that tragedy could lead to triumph, and that humanity's limits were far greater than once imagined. Today, new nations and private companies prepare to return to the moon and travel even farther, to Mars and beyond. The story that began in fear and competition now continues as a shared human adventure. And every time we look up at the moon shining in the night sky, we remember, once we dared to race for it, and we won.